The World of Tanks battlefield is relentless and unforgiving. It takes each commander a strong grasp of tactics to survive. Tactics like tracking enemies so that teammates can finish them off. Focusing your fire. And group rushing. In World of Tanks, it's always tactics that win the battles. I'm Mobius Y, just another tanker like you, and I'm here to help. This is the Tactics Talk. Hey, how's everybody doing? It's me again, Mobius Y, and I'm here with the second Tactics Talk. This should be fun, should be enjoyable. Hopefully you'll learn something too. Going into a little more detail than I did the last time about prioritizing targets, I actually was able to procure some images as well as a bit of gameplay footage to help reinforce visually what I'm discussing. So, in this episode I'm going to talk about a defensive technique that I'm sure several of you have heard before, but might not know exactly what it is, and it is a technique called sidescraping. Now, sidescraping is largely used for combat around corners, but it can also be used around other objects like rocks and cliffs and such things like that. It's very effective. It's a very strong defensive technique, and you don't see a lot of people employ it, so it will end up catching most people off guard until more people catch on about how to do it. So, essentially what sidescraping is it's merely turning your tank at such an angle that the effective armor of your side armor is far too great for your opponent's gun to penetrate it, while still being able to shoot them in a more vulnerable position. Now, simply put, it looks like this. So basically, as you can see here, with you putting your front plate behind a building or large obstacle and angling your armor just right, not only are you hiding the vulnerable portions of your lower glacis on the front of your tank, but you're also making it so that your side armor is angled just right to the point where the opponent's gun cannot successfully penetrate you. This allows you to freely back up and fire at will at the enemy's position, hopefully in a more vulnerable position than you, while they are forced to either simply shoot you in the tracks and try to track you, or try to shoot to the places like commander hatches, things like that. So there's a lot of advantages to moving to corner battles in the side scrape position as opposed to the usual peekaboo tactic, which is pull out with your front facing forward until your gun is out past the building or object, and then shooting them and then backing up before they can shoot you back. With the typical peekaboo maneuver, you're basically a larger target when you come out to shoot it back at your opponent, as well as your overall armor effectiveness is much less, as usually your side is exposed at too sharp of an angle for it to effectively bounce off shots. This also exposes weak points like your lower plate, and this can be bad for things like German and Russian tanks, as your fuel tanks or your engines can be damaged, or in the case of British tanks, if your lower plate is shot, it's likely that you'll be ammo racked, so on and so forth. This also risks you to ammo rack explosions and engine fires. On top of that, when backing up from the peekaboo position, you have to rely on your slower speed to get you back into cover. The tanks don't back up as fast as they move forward. There's one exception, and it's an artillery piece, and we're not talking about that, so. Not to mention, when you're coming out from the peekaboo position, if you are tracked just before you properly line up your shot, your tank can likely jink to the side right as you're tracked, thus screwing up your shot, or turning your armor more so that it's even less effective and much more easier to pen you and damage you. So, when corner fighting in the side scraping position, you're a smaller target to hit, Your armor has a much more effective armor value due to the angling of your armor, and your tracks can often absorb the damage. Now, you see it all the time where people's tracks get blown off and instinctively they hit the repair kit button to repair them. That is a habit that needs to be broken. Your tracks absorbing shots is actually a very good thing, especially when you are cornered fighting. Especially in the case where you don't have somebody on your flank shooting in your sides. If there's only one opponent in front of you and they are not damaging you, they're merely shooting you in the tracks or bouncing off your side armor, it's very good for them to do this. Chances are, in the higher tiers especially, if you have the skill repairs, which should be within the first 3 skills or perks that your crew learns, your tracks will repair in 4 seconds or less, which is faster than most tanks can even reload. So your tracks absorbing the shots is not necessarily a bad thing, and you can just let it happen at B. The idea here is to protect your health point pool. You'll see that the better players in a game, they perform better because they simply live longer by taking less unnecessary hits, taking less damage overall, therefore surviving in the game longer and keeping their gun in the game longer to deal more damage over time. And sidescraping is an extremely helpful and effective technique to help maintain a good health pool for as late in the game as possible. A couple other things about sidescraping is when you are ducking back into cover after poking up to shoot from the sidescrape position, you're actually using your better acceleration and top speed going forward to get back into cover. You get back into cover more quickly this way. And the slow reverse speed while backing out of cover to shoot means that you're far less likely to have your tank jink to the side violently when you're lining up a shot right when your tracks get blown out. So it's a very, very effective technique in more ways than one. It's very handy to know and pick up on. Now, what sidescraping looks like when looking at somebody who is sidescraping, this is a photo from the PC game, and this is an E75 in an effective sidescrape position. The tank that's facing it simply cannot reliably pen it, so to speak. I'm not sure what tank is facing it, it doesn't really matter, but you can see what I'm getting at. This E75 is in an effective side scrape position where shooting at the side armor won't do it. The only other option is shoot at the tracks, which will absorb the hit, or shoot at the upper plate, which will bounce the hit because it's the upper front plate. Shoot in the turret face, which most tanks will bounce because of a really, really strong protective mantlet or just a thick turret face. Or take the time to try to aim at something like a commander's hatch, which can be time consuming and leave you exposed, while your opponent that is effectively side scraping has plenty of time to line up a shot on your weak points and hit you back just as hard. So you can see right off the bat, it's a very, very handy tool to learn, very handy thing to have in more ways than just one. Now, the side scraping can be used even when you're facing off against 2 opponents, such as here, as well as off of non-square objects such as rocks and whatnot. The main gist is that so long as you are protecting your lower plate with an object in front of you, that's the main gist behind it. You can use that to effectively side scrape off of most anything in the game that is tall enough to protect the sides of your turret as well. When you are turned shooting at your opponents in front of you that you are side scraping against to protect yourself, you will also need to keep the opposite end of your turret protected from any flanking attempts. Otherwise, there will be easy shots into the side of your turret and you will simply take damage. So basically, if you're side scraping, you'll know you're doing it right because either the shot will bounce off your side, like so, or your tracks will absorb the hit. It'll be one of 2 things. And if you are side scraping correctly, you'll know it because you can potentially soak up a lot of possible damage and a lot of shots that'll just cling off of you and do absolutely nothing. So, very effective technique to learn, very handy to know, Keep in mind that some tanks are much better at side scraping than others. For example, the E50M Tier 10 medium tank, and by extension the E50, they're pretty good side scrapers. Most of the higher tier German heavies, such as the Tiger, Tiger 2, E75, and E100, those are classic side scrapers. They are very good at side scraping, especially things like the E75 and E100. The E75 has good side armor, as well as a surprisingly strong lower plate with a base effective armor of 200 plus millimeters. So angled just right when coming out from a side scrape, even the lower plate is well protected. The E100 is a great side scraper because of all this spaced armor around its tracks. It's got a good section of spaced armor sitting out on the sides of the hull protecting the tracks. Those are very good side scrapers. And what else makes good side scrapers is certain parts of the tracks, if they come out at a certain angle from the hull. It's really difficult to explain, but if the tracks are at a certain point underneath to where they're underneath or forward of the hull, to where a penetrating shot in that area of the tracks would actually not hit a part of the hull, those can also be used to absorb hits. And several tanks with that kind of feature, I suppose, on their tracks are also pretty good for side scraping, mostly because their tracks are effective at absorbing the hits. There are some tanks that aren't so great at side scraping, or just much harder to side scrape with. The FV215B British heavy tank can effectively side scrape with its rear mounted turret, but it's very difficult to get the angle down correctly, as angling it wrong exposes the very weak side armor, and it's a very thin margin. If you angle it too much, your thin side armor is exposed. If you angle too little, the enemies in front of you can just shoot the lower plate of the FV215B, which is likely into your fuel tanks and set you on fire over and over. Very difficult to do. The rear mounted turret does make it quite handy for side scraping though, and the mouse is the same way. It's a very good side scraper because it's got extremely thick side armor. You just got to make sure that you angle the turret right when you move back in. So that's essentially what side scraping is. Take the time to perhaps do a little of your own research to see if any of the tanks you're playing are effective side scrapers or not. I can say that at this point I have even effectively side scraped in a Comet, because the two people that I was facing off against kept shooting me in the tracks. And I am not aware of the Comet being labeled as a good side scraper. So anyways, I hope this tactics talk was really informational and helpful to you guys. I hope this really improves your game. And as always, thanks very much for listening. You guys are awesome. We'll see you next time on the battlefield. Take on.